I stood on the threshold of my daughter's house, rain beginning to spatter against my weathered work boots, trying to save her from financial ruin. And she screamed at me through gritted teeth, "Get away from here or I'm calling the police." Her voice cracked with fury, her hazel eyes, the same ones that used to light up when I'd read her bedtime stories, now blazed with a cold hatred I'd never seen before. So I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that seemed to drain the color from her face. I turned around, walked to my pickup truck and dialed my real estate attorney's number. If they wanted to lose their house so badly, then I'd make sure they got exactly what they were asking for. You won't believe what I did next. But before we continue, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this story ends. Theodore's face turned the color of dried blood as he slammed the credit report onto the break room table. Coffee from his ceramic mug, the one with "World's Greatest Husband" that my daughter had given him, splashed across the scattered financial documents I'd pulled from my work jacket. Bank statements, loan applications, credit monitoring alerts, papers that told a story he never wanted me to read. "Where the hell did you get these?" His voice cracked like a teenager's, betraying the panic beneath his designer polo shirt. I kept my tone steady, controlled, the same way I'd learned to speak to nervous subcontractors when a building inspection went sideways. First National called my house by mistake yesterday. Something about a late payment notice for Bethany's address. I tapped one particular statement with my calloused index finger. $67,000, Theodore. $67,000 in gambling debt secured against my daughter's house. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive aftershave mixed with the sour tang of desperation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets trapped in glass. "This doesn't concern you, old man." "Doesn't concern me?" I spread the papers across the scratched Formica table with the same methodical precision I'd once used to organize architectural blueprints. "My daughter's about to lose her home because you can't stay away from DraftKings and online poker, and it doesn't concern me." Theodore's Rolex, the one he'd bought during his winning streak last summer, caught the harsh light as he swept the documents aside. Papers fluttered to the industrial linoleum like dying autumn leaves. "Stay out of my business, Vincent. I handle my own affairs." "Your affairs?" I bent down, collecting each sheet with the same careful attention I'd once given to organizing construction permits. "These credit lines are tied to Bethany's house, the house she thinks is safe, the house she doesn't know you've been using as collateral for your gambling addiction." "She knows." But his voice wavered like a building settling on a weak foundation. "Does she?" I straightened up, holding his gaze with eyes that had seen 4 decades of men making promises they couldn't keep. "Does she know about the second mortgage? The home equity line of credit? The loan against her teacher's pension that she's been contributing to for 12 years? Theodore turned toward the vending machine humming in the corner, his shoulders rigid beneath his expensive shirt. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm handling it." "By borrowing more?" I pulled out my phone, showed him the screenshot I'd taken of his latest credit application, the one I'd found when I'd convinced the loan officer to let me review the file as a concerned cosigner. "This one's for $35,000 against the same property. When exactly were you planning to tell my daughter that you've mortgaged her future to fund your poker habit?" He spun around, lunged for my phone. I pulled it back just in time, but not before I saw something flash across his face that went beyond anger. Raw, primal fear. The kind of fear that comes when a man realizes his house of cards is about to collapse. "You don't understand," he said, but the fight was draining from his voice like air from a punctured tire. "I had a system. It was working. I was up 40,000 at one point. Your system is about to cost my daughter her home." I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket. "The home I co-signed for. The home I helped her buy because she trusted you to be responsible." "Your daughter?" Theodore laughed, but it sounded hollow in the small break room, echoing off walls covered with outdated safety posters. "She's my wife, Vincent. Has been for 4 years now. Maybe it's time you figured that out. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, but something clearer, more focused. Around us, the break room felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing inward. A half-eaten sandwich sat abandoned on the counter, edges curling like Theodore's promises. I built that house's equity, I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of sacrifice. 35 years of overtime shifts, 35 years of choosing mortgage payments over vacations, over new cars, over everything else that might have made life easier, and you're gambling it away one poker hand at a time. I didn't ask for your help then, and I don't need it now. Theodore grabbed his coffee mug, his knuckles white against the ceramic. Stay out of my business. Or what? He set the mug down hard enough that I heard it crack. Coffee began to seep across the table toward my recovered papers. Just stay out. I folded the damp documents with deliberate care, slipped them back into my jacket while Theodore stood there breathing hard like he'd just run a marathon. The vending machine cycled off with a mechanical sigh, leaving us in sudden, uncomfortable silence. I'm trying to help, I said. I don't want your help. I nodded, turned toward the door. Behind me, Theodore called out something about minding my own business, about knowing my place in the family hierarchy. But I was already thinking ahead, already planning my next move. Bethany would listen to reason. She had to. She was still my little girl, somewhere underneath the woman who'd chosen to marry a gambling addict. My footsteps echoed down the empty hallway as I checked my watch. 3:45 p.m. Bethany would be home from her teaching job soon, and Theodore wouldn't be back from his sales calls until after 7. Plenty of time for a father-daughter conversation that might save everything she'd worked so hard to build. The engine of my old Ford pickup ticked as it cooled in Bethany's driveway. Through her front window, I could see the blue glow of that massive 75-inch television Theodore had purchased during his last winning streak, the one that had probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in 3 months. I sat for a moment in the driver's seat, organizing my thoughts the way I'd once organized construction timelines. Step 1, show her the documents. Step 2, explain the imminent danger. Step 3, help her find a solution before it was too late. Bethany opened the front door before I could knock, her phone pressed against her ear like a lifeline. Mom, I have to call you back. Dad's here. She hung up, managed that careful smile she'd been perfecting since her wedding day. This is unexpected. We need to talk, sweetheart. Her smile flickered like a candle in the wind. She stepped aside, gestured toward the living room where Theodore's gaming setup dominated one corner, 3 monitors, a leather racing chair, controllers scattered like expensive toys across the mahogany coffee table. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something else I couldn't quite identify. Stress, maybe. The kind of tension that settles into walls when people fight about money late at night. Coffee? She asked, already moving toward the kitchen with the nervous energy of someone who needed her hands busy when conversations turned serious. This is serious, Bethany. She paused at the kitchen entrance, her hand gripping the doorframe hard enough that her knuckles went white. Okay, but I'm making coffee anyway. My nerves need something to do when Dad sounds like that. I followed her into the kitchen, noting the stack of unopened bills tucked behind the expensive espresso machine, the way she carefully avoided looking at them as she busied herself with coffee preparations. Wedding photos covered the refrigerator, Theodore prominent in every shot, his arm around her shoulders like a declaration of ownership. I found out about Theodore's gambling debts, I said. The coffee scoop clattered to the granite countertop. What gambling debts? I pulled out the documents, spread them across the kitchen island between us like evidence in a trial. Bank statements, credit reports, loan applications, collection notices, all bearing Theodore's signature, all tied to her address, all adding up to financial catastrophe. $67,000, maybe more. He's been using your house as collateral. Bethany's face went through a spectrum of colors, White, then pink, then deep red. That's impossible. It's right here. I pointed to the home equity line statement, the second mortgage application, the credit card cash advances. Look at the signatures, look at the dates, look at the address. No. She swept the papers aside with both hands, scattered them across the tile floor like she was trying to make them disappear through sheer force of will. Theodore would never do that. He would never risk our house. Bethany, look at the evidence. These are fake. She spun away from me, gripped the edge of the counter so hard her arms trembled. You made these up. Made them up? I knelt down, began gathering the papers with the patience I'd learned from 40 years of dealing with difficult clients. Why would I do that? Because you hate Theodore. Her voice rose to that pitch it had reached during her teenage years when she felt cornered. You've never liked him. You want to break us up. I want to save your house. Our house is fine. She whirled around, and I saw tears beginning to form in those hazel eyes that had once looked at me with complete trust. We make our payments. We've never been late, not once. Because you don't know about these other payments. I held up the gambling site statements I'd printed from Theodore's browser history, the evidence that had taken me 3 weeks to gather. $3,200 last month to PokerStars, $2,100 to DraftKings, $1,800 to some offshore betting site I've never heard of. Where do you think that money comes from? Bethany pressed her hands over her ears like a child trying to block out a nightmare. Stop it. He's borrowed against everything you own. Your car, your pension, your house. Stop it! She lunged for her phone on the counter, nearly knocking over the coffee maker in her desperation. Theodore loves me. He would never hurt me. You're lying. I stood slowly, my knees protesting after 40 years of construction work. Around us, the kitchen felt fragile somehow, like a movie set that might collapse if anyone raised their voice too loud. I'm not lying, sweetheart. Don't call me that. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts. Don't you dare call me that. Bethany, get out. The words came out strangled, desperate. Get out of my house right now. Your house? I looked around at Theodore's expensive purchases, at the bills she refused to read, at the wedding pictures where I barely appeared. This house I helped you buy? The one I co-signed for when Theodore's credit wasn't good enough? Get out. She raised the phone like a weapon. Get out or I'll call the police and tell them you're harassing us. Something shifted inside my chest. Not hurt exactly. I'd moved past hurt somewhere between the coffee maker and her covering her ears. This was something else. Something colder and more focused. I smiled. Bethany blinked, clearly confused by my expression. She'd expected anger, maybe pleading. Instead, I collected my papers with the same methodical care I'd shown Theodore in the break room, each document folded precisely and slipped into my jacket pocket. You'll call the police, I said quietly. Yes, I will. On your father. Who's trying to save your house? You're not trying to save anything. But uncertainty flickered across her face like shadows. You're trying to ruin my marriage. I walked toward the door, paused in the kitchen entrance. Behind me, Bethany clutched her phone like it was the only solid thing in her collapsing world. I hope Theodore's worth it, I said. He is. I hope the house is too. I let myself out, walked slowly to my pickup truck while Bethany appeared in the front window, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling Theodore, warning him about her crazy father and his fake documents. The engine started on the first try, reliable like everything else in my life used to be. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught sight of Bethany watching from behind her expensive curtains. She looked small in that big window, dwarfed by all of Theodore's purchases, surrounded by the trappings of a life built on borrowed money and borrowed time. My daughter, who used to help me balance the checkbook when she was 10 years old, who used to trust me with everything, who had just chosen her gambling addict husband over the father who'd sacrificed everything for her future. I drove home slowly, planning my next conversation. This one would be with someone who understood the legal weight of a co-signer's signature, someone who appreciated the value of proper documentation, someone who knew that family sentiment didn't override contract law. Theodore and Bethany were about to learn that some foundations couldn't be shaken, even when everything built on top of them was crumbling. My house felt unnaturally quiet after the chaos of Bethany's kitchen confrontation. I set my keys in the small wooden bowl by the front door, the one she'd made in her high school woodworking class back when she still believed her old man knew something about building things that lasted. The coffee maker gurgled to life with the kind of reliable precision that used to define my entire world. While it brewed, I stood at my kitchen sink, staring out at the small garden I'd been tending for 20 years. February in Central Florida meant the orange and grapefruit trees were heavy with fruit I'd probably eat alone. Everything I'd built here, everything I'd maintained with methodical care felt hollow now, like constructing a house only to discover the owners had moved out without notice. The coffee was strong and black, the way I'd learned to drink it during those early years when cream and sugar were luxuries we couldn't afford. I carried the steaming mug to my living room, settled into the recliner that had belonged to my father, and let the memories wash over me like floodwater. 1989. Bethany was 8 years old, all missing teeth and endless questions about why Daddy had to work so many weekend shifts. I'd taken a second job at Morrison's Concrete, mixing foundations until my shoulders screamed and my hands cracked from the lime. 12-hour shifts at Hartwell Engineering during the week, then 8 more hours pouring concrete on Saturdays and Sundays. 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, so we could make that mortgage payment 5 days early every month. "Why do you pay extra money, Daddy?" Bethany had asked once, perched on my lap while I filled out the payment coupon by hand. Her small finger traced the numbers I'd written in careful block letters, always $50 more than the minimum required. "Because the bank charges us interest every month, sweetheart," I'd explained, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "If we pay extra money toward what we owe them, we save money later on." She nodded with the serious expression she got when trying to understand grown-up concepts. "So we'll own the house faster?" "That's right, baby girl. So it'll really be ours." The memory tasted bitter now, mixed with coffee and 36 years of irony. I'd scrimped and saved and calculated every extra payment, thinking I was securing her future, teaching her the value of ownership, of building equity instead of throwing money away on rent. I remembered the year we couldn't afford a vacation because the air conditioning unit died in August. Bethany had cried about missing summer camp while I spent our Disney World fund on HVAC repairs and installation. "It's our house," I'd told her while sweat poured down my face in the Florida heat. "When you own something, you take care of it first." But she'd forgotten that lesson somewhere between her engagement ring and Theodore's promises of easy money, forgotten the nights I'd eaten generic mac and cheese for dinner so she could have name-brand cereal for breakfast, forgotten the overtime hours that paid for her college education, her first car, her wedding reception. Theodore had never worked overtime in his life, never calculated mortgage payments or balanced a checkbook or chosen between electricity and groceries. Theodore lived in a world where money appeared when needed, where consequences were abstract concepts that happened to other people. And Bethany had chosen that world over mine. My coffee had grown cold while I'd been lost in the past. I set the mug on the side table next to a framed photo of Bethany at her college graduation. She'd been so proud that day, excited about starting her teaching career debt-free, because her careful father had been planning and saving since she was 8 years old. "I did it all for her," I said aloud, my voice strange in the quiet house. But that wasn't entirely true anymore, was it? She'd made her choice when she told me to get out, when she chose Theodore's lies over my documentation, when she threatened to call the police on her own father. Now I had a different choice to make. I could walk away. Let Theodore's gambling addiction destroy everything I'd built. Let them lose the house I'd worked 20-hour days to secure. Let 36 years of sacrifice evaporate because my daughter preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Or I could fight back. Not as a father trying to save his ungrateful child, not as a grandfather worried about future grandchildren having a stable home. Those motivations had died in Bethany's kitchen when she covered her ears and called me a liar. I could fight as someone who'd been cheated, someone whose 3 decades of equity was about to disappear into Theodore's poker addiction, someone who'd been dismissed and disrespected and told his sacrifices didn't matter. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Everything here was paid for, maintained, organized, proof that careful planning and steady effort created lasting value. Theodore's philosophy was the opposite: borrow against tomorrow to pay for today's pleasures. Time to see which philosophy survived a real legal battle. I stood up, stretched muscles that remembered carrying concrete bags and crawling under houses to check foundation work. My body might be older, but my mind still functioned like an engineer's. Problem identification, resource assessment, solution implementation. Theodore and Bethany thought they held all the cards because they had possession of the house. They'd forgotten about the documents I'd signed 4 years ago, documents that made me more than just a concerned father. I walked to my home office, opened the filing cabinet that had organized my life for 40 years. Everything alphabetized, dated, cross-referenced with the same precision I'd once brought to construction projects. The folder labeled House Bethany occupied an entire section in the second drawer, thick with documents spanning from her original mortgage application to last month's property tax assessment. I pulled the folder, spread its contents across my desk under the bright halogen lamp I'd installed when my eyes started needing help with fine print. Loan application, credit reports from 2020, income verification forms, employment history, bank statements, and there, buried beneath Bethany's teaching contract, the document I'd been looking for, the original mortgage application. Both our signatures at the bottom, Bethany's careful teacher handwriting next to my engineer's block printing. But it was the section above our signatures that made me smile for the 3rd time that day. Co-applicant, Vincent Brooks, Social Security number, redacted, relationship to primary applicant, father, co-signer, financial responsibility, joint, and several liability for full loan amount. I leaned back in my leather desk chair, the same one I'd bought when I made chief engineer 15 years ago. Joint and several liability. The phrase carried legal weight that Theodore, in all his gambling wisdom, had apparently forgotten about. The memory came flooding back with perfect clarity. March 2020. Bethany and Theodore sitting across from loan officer Patricia Morrison at SunTrust Bank. Theodore's employment history was inconsistent, 3 job changes in 2 years, plus that 6-month gap when he'd tried to make a living playing online poker. His credit score hovered around 640 on a good day. Bethany's salary as a middle school teacher was steady but modest. Together, they qualified for maybe $180,000 in financing, but the house Bethany wanted, the one in the good school district, the one with the screened porch and the 2-car garage, cost $295,000. We'll need a co-signer, Patricia had explained, her fingers dancing across her calculator with practiced efficiency. Someone with excellent credit and verifiable income to guarantee the full loan amount. Theodore had shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What does that mean exactly? It means the co-signer becomes legally responsible for the debt if you default. They have the same rights and responsibilities as the primary borrowers regarding any major financial decisions involving the property. I'd hesitated then, my engineer's instinct for risk assessment kicking into overdrive. 42 years of steady employment, credit score over 820, substantial savings account. Was I really prepared to put all of that at risk for Theodore's financial stability? But Bethany had looked at me with those eyes that had been melting my resolve since she was 8 years old. Please, Daddy. We'll never miss a payment, I promise. You understand, Patricia had continued, that as co-applicant, Mr. Brooks, you'll have legal standing regarding any major decisions about the property. Refinancing, home equity loans, even sale of the home would require your consent or participation. Theodore had nodded quickly, eager to move past the legal technicalities and get to the fun part of house hunting. Bethany had squeezed my hand, and I'd signed my name, thinking I was helping my daughter achieve the American dream. Now, 4 years later, with Theodore's gambling debts secured against my co-signed property, those legal technicalities were looking remarkably useful. I pulled out a magnifying glass, read the fine print I'd skimmed past in 2020. The language was dense, loaded with legal terminology that would have given me a headache if I hadn't spent 4 decades reading construction contracts and zoning regulations. But one section stood out like a lighthouse beacon. In the event of financial distress, default, or dispute regarding property use or disposal, all co-applicants retain equal legal standing to initiate protective measures, including but not limited to foreclosure proceedings, forced sale or transfer of title to protect their financial interests. Forced sale. I set the document down, stared at my reflection in the dark window. Theodore and Bethany could threaten to call the police on a concerned father, but they couldn't dismiss a legal co-owner who discovered his investment was being gambled away without his knowledge or consent. I reached for my phone, scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd saved 3 years ago, when I'd helped Bethany understand property tax assessments. Marcus Chen, real estate attorney who specialized in family property disputes and partition actions. Tomorrow I'd make some calls. Not as a father trying to save his ungrateful daughter from her gambling husband. Not as a grandfather worried about future family stability. As a co-owner protecting his investment from financial predators. Theodore thought he was clever, borrowing against property he didn't fully understand. Bethany thought she could dismiss me because I was just dad, easily ignored when his opinions became inconvenient. They'd both forgotten the most important rule I'd learned in construction work. Always check the foundation before you start building, and in this case, their foundation had my name all over it. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., the same time my internal clock had been set for 42 years of construction work. Outside my bedroom window, dawn was breaking over Central Florida with that particular quality of light that promised another humid day ahead. But for the first time in weeks, I felt clear-headed, focused, like an engineer who'd finally identified the structural problem and knew exactly how to fix it. Coffee first, then strategy. The same routine that had guided me through 4 decades of complex projects. By 7 a.m., I was sitting in my office with the House Bethany folder spread across my desk like architectural blueprints. Every document organized chronologically, every financial detail highlighted and cross-referenced. Theodore might think he was clever with his gambling schemes, but he'd never dealt with someone who'd spent his career managing million-dollar construction budgets. My first call went to Marcus Chen's office. Chen Legal Associates. This is Jennifer speaking. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Chen regarding a property partition matter. It's time-sensitive. Can you hold, please? Classical music filled my ear while I waited, staring at a framed photo of the last office building I'd supervised, 30 stories of steel and glass, completed on time and under budget. Every successful project started with proper legal groundwork. Mr. Brooks, this is Marcus. Jennifer says you need to discuss a partition issue. Are we talking about family property? We're talking about a co-signed mortgage where one party is using the property as collateral for gambling debts without the other party's knowledge or consent. A pause. That's specific. Can you be here at 10 this morning? I'll be there. Chen's office occupied the 3rd floor of a glass building downtown, with law books lining the walls and certificates that suggested he knew his way around Florida property law. Marcus himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, but he had the careful, methodical manner I appreciated in competent professionals. Let's start with the basics, he said, settling behind his desk with a yellow legal pad. You're listed as co-applicant on the original mortgage? I slid the loan documents across his desk. Joint and several liability for the full amount. Signed 4 years ago when my daughter and her husband couldn't qualify on their own. Marcus reviewed each page with the thoroughness I'd demanded from building inspectors. His eyebrows rose when he reached the gambling debt documentation. $67,000 in additional borrowing against the same property, he murmured. All without your knowledge or consent as co-signer. That's correct. And you've attempted to address this with the other parties? I pulled out my phone, played him the voicemail Theodore had left after our confrontation. Stay out of my business, old man. I handle my own affairs. Marcus made notes on his legal pad. Florida law is clear about cosigner rights in cases like this. You have legal standing to petition for partition by sale if you can demonstrate that the property is being used in a way that jeopardizes your financial interests. What does that mean practically? It means we force a sale through the court system. The property gets appraised, marketed, and sold. Proceeds are divided according to ownership percentages after paying off all liens and legal costs. I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction, but the calm that comes from finding the right tool for a specific job. Timeline? 60 to 90 days from filing to completion, assuming they don't contest the action. Given the documentation you have, contesting would be expensive and futile. And if they do contest? Marcus smiled grimly. They'd need to prove that borrowing $67,000 against co-signed property without consent somehow benefits your financial interests. Good luck with that argument. We spent the next hour reviewing procedures, costs, and potential complications. Marcus answered each question with the competence I'd learned to recognize in skilled professionals. No unnecessary drama, just clear explanations of legal reality. One warning, he said as we concluded. Once we file this petition, there's no going back. Your relationship with your daughter will be permanently altered. I thought about Bethany's threat to call the police, about Theodore's gambling addiction, about 36 years of mortgage payments being wagered on poker hands. I think that relationship was altered when she chose to protect her husband's gambling addiction over her father's financial security. Marcus nodded, began preparing documents. We'll file Monday morning. My second stop was Riverside Realty, where I'd worked with agent Jennifer Walsh when I'd helped Bethany find the house 4 years ago. Jennifer's office was decorated with photos of happy families standing in front of sold signs, the American dream captured in glossy 8x10s. Vincent, this is a pleasant surprise. How's Bethany enjoying the house? That's actually what I'm here about. I need a current market analysis for that property. Jennifer's professional smile flickered slightly. Is everything okay? I need to know what the house would sell for in today's market. Full comparative analysis, current conditions, realistic pricing. She opened her laptop, began typing. I watched her work, noting the same attention to detail that had impressed me during our previous dealings. Charts appeared, neighborhood comparisons, recent sales data. After 30 minutes, she leaned back. In this market, you're looking at $485,000, maybe $495,000 with the right buyer. The neighborhood has appreciated significantly since 2020. I made notes in my pocket notebook. Original purchase price was $295,000. Beautiful equity buildup. Current mortgage balance would be around $260,000. $258,000 plus the additional $67,000 Theodore's borrowed against it. Jennifer's professional expression didn't change, but I saw something shift behind her eyes. Additional borrowing? Home equity lines, cash advances, all secured by the property, all without my knowledge as cosigner. I see. She closed her laptop, leaned forward slightly. Vincent, are we talking about a partition sale situation? We're talking about a court-ordered sale. I'm co-owner of a property that's being used as collateral for gambling debts. Understanding dawned across her face. Partition sales typically result in below-market pricing. Buyers know it's a motivated seller situation. How much below market? 10 to 15% discount. Call it $420,000 to $430,000 range. I calculated quickly. $420,000 minus $258,000 original mortgage minus $67,000 in Theodore's debts minus legal fees and real estate commissions. Roughly $85,000 in net proceeds, split according to ownership percentages. When you're ready to move forward, Jennifer said, handing me her business card, call me directly. Partition sales require special handling, but they move quickly once the court orders them. My final stop was First National Bank, where I'd maintained my accounts for 25 years. I walked into branch manager Carol Patterson's office with copies of all my documentation. I need to understand my rights and obligations as co-signer on a mortgage, where the other parties are defaulting on their responsibilities. Carol reviewed the gambling debt statements with the careful attention of someone who'd seen financial disasters before. "Mr. Brooks, this is concerning. Have you considered removing yourself from the mortgage? That would require Theodore and Bethany's cooperation, which I don't have. And you've attempted to address the additional borrowing with them?" I played her Theodore's voicemail threat about staying out of his business. Carol made notes in my file. "Given the circumstances, you might want to consider protective measures. As co-signer, you're equally liable for any defaults." "What kind of protective measures?" "Legal action to force resolution before the situation deteriorates further. Partition proceedings, for example." The third professional in one day, recommending the same course of action. Sometimes the right solution was obvious, once you stripped away the emotional complications. I drove home through late afternoon traffic, my mind organizing the next phase like a construction schedule. Foundation complete, legal research finished, materials ordered, attorneys and real estate agents engaged, permits pulled, documentation assembled. Now came the construction phase where careful planning met unpredictable human reactions. But unlike construction projects, this one had a guaranteed outcome. Florida property law didn't care about hurt feelings or family dynamics. It cared about contracts, signatures, ownership percentages, and established legal procedures. Theodore and Bethany were about to discover that some foundations couldn't be shaken, even when everything built on top of them was collapsing. That evening, I sat in my recliner with a beer and the satisfaction that comes from proper preparation. My phone remained silent, no desperate calls from Bethany, no threatening messages from Theodore. They probably thought our confrontation was over, that family dynamics would eventually smooth over the way they always had. They didn't understand that this was no longer about family. This was about property law, and property law had very clear remedies for situations like theirs. Monday morning, Marcus would file our petition. By Monday afternoon, Theodore and Bethany would discover that legal documents weren't suggestions, and co-signers weren't just financial ornaments to be ignored when their opinions became inconvenient. The foundation was about to shift and everything built on top of it would have to adapt or crumble. Monday morning arrived clear and cool, one of those February days that reminded me why I'd stayed in Florida for 40+ years. I dressed carefully, my good suit, the charcoal gray one I'd worn to Bethany's wedding, along with the tie she'd given me for Father's Day 3 years ago. If we were going to court, I'd dress for the occasion. Marcus met me in the courthouse parking lot at 8:45 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen its share of legal battles. His expression was focused, professional, the look of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. "Ready for this, Vincent?" "I've been ready since Friday." The courthouse steps were impressive. White limestone with columns that suggested permanence, authority, consequences that couldn't be argued away. Inside, metal detectors and security guards processed a steady stream of people handling the business of justice. Divorces, custody disputes, civil matters, criminal arraignments, all the ways life eventually required official intervention. We took the elevator to the 4th floor, walked down a corridor lined with courtroom doors bearing brass nameplates. The clerk of court's office buzzed with quiet efficiency, computers humming, printers working, people filing documents that would change lives forever. "Final review," Marcus said, spreading our petition across a small table in the waiting area. "Petition for partition by sale, listing you as co-owner, Theodore and Bethany as co-defendants, property address, legal description, current liens and encumbrances." I read through each page with the methodical care I'd once applied to reviewing building specifications. My name appeared throughout the document, not as father or co-signer, but as plaintiff and co-owner. Legal language that transformed family relationships into property rights. "Filing fee is $485, Marcus said, plus service of process costs for both defendants. I wrote the check without hesitation. 42 years of steady employment had taught me that some problems required financial solutions. This was cheaper than watching Theodore gamble away my 3 decades of equity payments. At the clerk's window, a professional woman with kind eyes processed our paperwork with practiced efficiency. "Case number CV 2025-1847, she announced, stamping each document with an official seal that seemed to echo through the quiet office. "Initial hearing scheduled for March 18th, 9 a.m. Courtroom D." The sound of that stamp was final, decisive. No more family discussions or emotional appeals. No more Theodore's threats or Bethany's denial. Just legal process moving forward according to rules that couldn't be manipulated or ignored. "Service of process will be completed within 5 business days," the clerk continued. "Defendants have 20 days from service to file a response." Marcus collected our certified copies, receipts, official notifications. That's it. The machinery is in motion. We walked back through the courthouse corridors, past other people beginning or ending their legal battles. In the elevator, Marcus reviewed the next steps. "They'll be served by Friday. Then we wait for their response, or more likely, their panic. What if they try to transfer the property? They can't. The Ellis pendants we filed prevents any transfers or major financial changes until the case is resolved." I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but the relief that comes from proper preparation. Like finishing a foundation pour and knowing it would cure correctly, supporting whatever was built on top. In the parking lot, Marcus and I shook hands. "I'll call you after they're served. Should be interesting." I drove home slowly, taking back roads instead of the interstate. My radio played classic rock while I processed what we'd accomplished. For the first time in weeks, Theodore and Bethany's choices couldn't affect me directly. The legal system would handle everything now, according to rules they'd have to follow whether they liked them or not. At home, I filed my certified copies in the House Bethany folder, right behind the original mortgage documents. Everything organized, everything documented, everything ready for whatever came next. My phone sat silent on the kitchen counter. Soon, very soon, it would start ringing. Theodore and Bethany would receive official papers from a sheriff's deputy, would realize this wasn't family drama they could dismiss with tears or threats. I made coffee, settled into my recliner, and waited. The next move was theirs, but the game was now being played by my rules. My phone started ringing Thursday afternoon. Bethany's name appeared on the caller ID as I sat in my kitchen, finishing a late lunch of leftover meatloaf and reading the newspaper sports section. I watched it buzz against the counter like an angry wasp, let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Theodore this time. I went to my living room, picked up a Tom Clancy novel I'd been meaning to finish, tried to read while my phone continued its electronic tantrum. By evening, I had 9 missed calls and 4 voicemails. The first message was Bethany, her voice shaking like autumn leaves. "Dad, please call me back. We got some papers today from the sheriff's office and I don't understand what's happening. There's all this legal language about partition sales and court orders. Please just call me back." Theodore's message came 2 hours later, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "What kind of sick game are you playing, old man? You think you can scare us with official papers? This is family business, not some courtroom circus. Call me back now." The third message was Bethany again, tears evident in every word. "Dad, I'm begging you. Theodore says you're trying to force us to sell our house. That can't be true. Please call me. Please." The fourth was Theodore, his previous anger replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "Look, Vincent, maybe we all got a little heated the other day, but this legal stuff is going too far. Can't we work this out like adults? Like family?" I deleted all 4 messages without returning the calls. Friday brought a text message marathon. Theodore started early. "This partition lawsuit is ridiculous. No judge will side with a bitter old man over family." Bethany's texts were longer, more desperate. "Dad, I know we had a fight, but this is too extreme. Can't we sit down and talk this through? I love you, but I love Theodore too. Please don't make me choose between you. By evening, Theodore's messages had turned threatening again. You're making a bigger mistake than you realize, old man. Think about what you're really doing here. I showed the threatening text to Marcus when he called with confirmation that both defendants had been served. Standard reaction, he said with the calm of someone who'd seen this pattern before. Panic, denial, anger, then attempts at negotiation. What matters is whether they file a response by the deadline. What if they don't? Default judgment. The court grants our petition automatically. Saturday brought a new wave of communication. I let all calls go to voicemail, spent the day in my workshop, building a new bookshelf from oak planks I'd been saving for a special project. Physical work helped me think clearly, and I needed to consider my strategy for the next phase. Sunday's voicemail from Bethany was different. Calmer, more calculated. Dad, Theodore talked to a lawyer friend of his. He says this partition thing is just a scare tactic, that you don't really want to sell our house. You just want attention, want us to realize how much we need you. So we're not going to play along with this legal circus until you come to your senses. I played that message twice, then called Marcus. They're not filing a response? He asked. Theodore thinks it's a bluff. Perfect. That's exactly what we hoped they'd think. Monday brought silence. No calls, no texts, no voicemails. Theodore and Bethany had apparently decided to ignore the legal system, confident that family relationships trumped property law. I spent the morning organizing my tax documents. April 15th was still 2 months away, but I'd always believed in staying ahead of deadlines. Around noon, I drove to the courthouse to check public records. Sure enough, no response filed by either defendant. That evening, I called Jennifer Walsh to schedule the property appraisal required for court-ordered sale. They're not contesting, she asked. They think it's a family dispute that doesn't require legal response. Jennifer whistled softly. That's going to cost them about $60,000 in equity. Tuesday brought one final voicemail from Theodore, his voice carrying less conviction than before. Look, Vincent, maybe we all said things we didn't mean. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? Bethany's making her famous lasagna. We can work this out like family should. I deleted the message and made fresh coffee. Outside my kitchen window, my orange trees were heavy with fruit. Oranges that had taken 3 years to mature, requiring patience and consistent care to reach their potential. Theodore and Bethany had made their choice. They decided that legal documents were suggestions, that court deadlines were optional, that property law didn't apply to their special situation. In 1 week, they'd discover how wrong they were. But by then, it would be too late to change course. The legal machinery I'd set in motion would complete its work, regardless of their family feelings or desperate last-minute appeals. I'd given them every opportunity to address Theodore's gambling problem responsibly. They'd chosen denial over reality, threats over honest conversation, family sentiment over legal obligations. Now they'd live with the consequences of those choices, whether they understood them or not. Marcus's call came Wednesday morning while I was watering my orange trees, watching the morning sun filter through leaves heavy with fruit that would ripen whether anyone tended them or not. Vincent, we need to discuss something, he said, his voice carrying that careful tone lawyers use when delivering news that could go either way. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? I arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, found him reviewing a thick file folder with the expression of someone who'd seen too many family disputes turn ugly. Property partition cases can get messy, he began without preamble, especially when defendants realize they're actually going to lose their home. Theodore's gambling addiction adds another layer of unpredictability. He pulled out several case studies, spread them across his desk like evidence photos, police reports, restraining orders, incidents of property damage and personal intimidation. You're suggesting I'm in physical danger? I'm suggesting that staying in your current residence might not be strategically wise while this plays out. Desperate people do desperate things, and Theodore has already demonstrated poor judgment. The idea hadn't occurred to me, but as Marcus outlined the risks, it made perfect sense. Theodore was spiraling, his gambling addiction consuming not just money, but rational thinking. Cornering desperate addicts in familiar territory rarely ended well. That evening, I drove through apartment complexes near downtown looking for temporary housing that met my criteria. Month-to-month lease, furnished, good security, reasonable proximity to the courthouse. The Riverside Gardens complex fit perfectly, modest but clean with coded entry and a property manager who asked no unnecessary questions. "How long do you anticipate staying?" she asked while processing my application. 2 to 3 months depending on legal proceedings. She nodded professionally, handed me keys to Unit 3B. Utilities included, parking space 23. I spent Thursday evening packing essentials, clothes for 3 months, legal documents, personal items that couldn't be replaced. Everything else stayed behind. The family photos on my mantle, the tools in my garage, the furniture I'd accumulated over 4 decades of steady employment. All of it would wait for my return. Friday morning, I loaded my pickup with 3 suitcases and a box of legal files. Before leaving, I arranged for mail forwarding and contacted my neighbor, Harold Murphy, to keep an eye on things. "Going somewhere, Vincent?" Harold asked, noting the suitcases. "Legal situation requires temporary relocation. Nothing dramatic." Harold nodded with the understanding of someone who'd raised 3 daughters himself. "Family stuff? Property dispute? Say no more. House will be fine. I'll keep the yard looking decent." The apartment felt strange after 30 years in my own home. Generic furniture, neutral colors, no history attached to any surface. But it also felt safe, anonymous, removed from the emotional battlefield my family had created. I sat in the unfamiliar living room, looking out at a parking lot instead of my garden, and felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in weeks, my phone wasn't buzzing with threats or emotional manipulation. No one knew where I was except Marcus and Jennifer, both bound by professional confidentiality. Theodore and Bethany could rage and scheme and threaten all they wanted. They'd be performing for an empty house, their anger echoing through rooms that no longer contained their target. Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week after my relocation, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Appraiser completed evaluation, report filed with court. Market analysis confirms our projections." 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing like a fire alarm. Bethany's number appeared first, followed immediately by Theodore's. I let both calls go to voicemail, made fresh coffee, and waited for the storm. The voicemails revealed everything I needed to know about their mental state. Bethany, her voice shaking like she was coming apart. "Dad, someone came to our house today. A man with a clipboard and camera measuring everything, taking pictures of every room. He said it was court-ordered for something called a partition sale. Dad, please call me back. I'm scared." Theodore, barely controlled fury crackling through the phone speaker. "What kind of sick power trip is this, Vincent? You sent some stranger to our house with a camera. Our neighbors saw him, started asking questions. You're humiliating us. Call me back immediately." I deleted both messages, opened my laptop, checked the court's electronic filing system. The appraiser's report was already uploaded. $467,000 valuation with detailed photographs and condition assessments. Professional, thorough, devastating. My phone buzzed again. Text from Bethany. "Dad, please just talk to us. We can work this out." Then Theodore. "This has gone far enough. Call me back or I'm coming to your house." I smiled, knowing he'd find my house empty, my mailbox filling with forwarded mail he couldn't intercept. More calls throughout the evening. 8 from Bethany, 5 from Theodore, each voicemail more desperate than the last. Bethany. "Dad, I drove by your house tonight. Your truck isn't there, the lights are off. Where are you? Why won't you talk to me? I know you're angry, but this is destroying us." Theodore. "You can't hide forever, old man. I found out the appraiser was hired by Chen Legal Associates. This isn't some bluff anymore, is it?" By Friday morning, they'd discovered the full scope of the legal filing. Theodore's voicemail was different, smaller, frightened. "I talked to a real lawyer today. He says you can actually force us to sell our house. That we should have responded to those court papers. Vincent, please, can we meet somewhere? Can we figure this out before it's too late?" I spent Friday afternoon in the courthouse law library, researching similar cases, finding comfort in the systematic way legal precedent created predictable outcomes. Property law didn't care about hurt feelings or family dynamics. It cared about documents, signatures, ownership percentages, established procedures. Saturday brought a new wave of communication. Emails this time, since I'd stopped answering calls. From Bethany's school email account. "Dad, I understand you're angry. Maybe I was wrong to threaten to call the police. Maybe Theodore has been borrowing too much money. But forcing us to sell our home, this will destroy our credit, our marriage, our future. Please don't do this to us." From Theodore. "Look, I admit I have a gambling problem. I'll get help. Gamblers Anonymous, counseling, whatever you want. Just stop this lawsuit. We can pay you back over time. Work out a payment plan." I forwarded both emails to Marcus with a brief note. For the file. Sunday evening, my phone rang 18 times. I turned off the ringer, went to bed early. Monday morning brought the next development. Jennifer called with updates. 4 potential buyers submitted offers over the weekend. All cash, quick closing. The court-ordered sale pricing is attracting serious investor interest. How much? Highest offer is $445,000, $15,000 below appraisal, but guaranteed 20-day closing. While I was talking to Jennifer, my phone buzzed with another call. Theodore again. This time, when it went to voicemail, I could hear Bethany crying in the background. Theodore's voice, completely defeated. "Vincent, I know you can hear me. We drove around for hours looking for your truck. Asked your neighbors if they knew where you went. No one knows anything. You just disappeared. Like you planned this whole thing." A long pause then. "We're going to lose our house, aren't we? The lawyer says we waited too long to respond. That the court will just take it away from us. 20 days. We have 20 days to find somewhere else to live." Another pause, Bethany's sobbing clearly audible. "I'm sorry, Vincent." "Bethany's sorry too. We were wrong about everything. The gambling, the threats, telling you to stay away. But please, please don't make us homeless. We're family." I saved the voicemail, forwarded it to Marcus with a note. Evidence of acknowledgement. Family. They'd rediscovered that word now that legal consequences were bearing down on them like a freight train. Family hadn't mattered when they'd covered their ears and called me a liar. Family hadn't mattered when Theodore threatened me in my own home. Family hadn't mattered when Bethany chose his gambling addiction over my 36 years of sacrifice. But now, facing the loss of their home, suddenly we were family again. The irony was perfect and perfectly meaningless. Legal proceedings would continue regardless of their newfound appreciation for family relationships. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided according to ownership percentages, and justice would be served through proper channels. I made dinner in my temporary kitchen, watched the evening news, and felt the satisfaction that comes from seeing carefully planned strategies produce their intended results. The for sale sign appeared on Tuesday morning. I didn't witness the installation. That happened while I was at the bank, depositing a consulting check from my former employer. But Jennifer called with photographic confirmation. Professional yard sign, MLS number, motivated seller writer attached. She reported with professional satisfaction. "We already have showing appointments scheduled for this afternoon. 3 cash buyers, 2 investment groups. The below-market pricing is generating serious interest." I asked her to email me the listing photos. My laptop screen filled with images of Bethany's house, their house technically, though legal ownership was more complicated than they'd ever understood. Professional photography made every room look spacious and bright. Theodore's expensive gaming setup had been pushed into corners, out of sight. Bethany's decorative touches minimized to appeal to potential buyers. Their home had become a commodity, which was exactly what it had always been from the legal system's perspective. Wednesday, Brought official documentation, certified mail to my apartment, notice of partition sale with specific timelines, buyer qualification requirements and closing procedures. 21 days for current occupants to vacate voluntarily, followed by sheriff's assistance if necessary. I forwarded the documents to Marcus, called to confirm next steps. Everything's proceeding normally, he said. They haven't filed any emergency motions to delay or contest, which suggests they've finally accepted reality. Or they're planning something desperate. Possibly, but legally there's nothing they can do at this point. The sale will complete regardless of their cooperation. Thursday afternoon, Jennifer called with updates. We accepted an offer from the cash buyer, $445,000, 18-day closing, no contingencies. Your net proceeds will be approximately $94,000 after legal fees, real estate commissions, and outstanding mortgage balances. $94,000. Not a fortune by today's standards, but substantial compensation for 36 years of mortgage payments on a house I'd never lived in. Money that represented justice, served through proper legal channels rather than family emotional manipulation. When do they need to be out? Closing is scheduled for April 2nd. They need to vacate by March 30th to allow final walkthrough and key transfer. I marked the dates on my calendar, felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but the calm that comes from seeing complex projects reach completion on schedule. Friday brought an unexpected development. Bethany appeared at my old house, saw my truck wasn't there, sat on my front porch for over an hour waiting. My neighbor Harold called to tell me. She looked terrible, Harold said with genuine concern. Crying, checking her phone constantly. Finally left a note under your door and drove away in that little Honda of hers. I drove over that evening, retrieved the note. Bethany's handwriting, usually neat as a teacher's, looked shaky and desperate. Dad, I know you're avoiding us, but we're running out of time. We found an apartment, but we need first month, last month security deposit, moving costs. Theodore's trying to get a loan, but his credit is destroyed from all the gambling. Could you please just talk to us? We're going to be homeless in 2 weeks. Love, your daughter Bethany. She'd signed it, your daughter Bethany, as if reminding me of our relationship would change my legal strategy. As if family sentiment could override property law and court orders. I filed the note with my other legal documents and drove back to my apartment. The weekend passed quietly. My phone didn't ring. Theodore and Bethany had apparently exhausted their communication attempts, or maybe they were too busy looking for moving trucks and temporary housing. Sunday evening, Jennifer called with final details. Closing scheduled for Thursday, April 2nd, 10 a.m. Title company, buyer's attorney, and myself. You don't need to attend unless you want to. I'll be there. Excellent. Bring photo ID and social security card. We'll handle everything else. March 30th arrived, overcast and humid. From my apartment window, I could see moving trucks on several streets. Late March was popular for relocations in Florida. I wondered if Theodore and Bethany had managed to secure their moving truck, their new apartment, their temporary solution to the consequences of their choices. My phone remained silent. No last-minute pleas, no final attempts at emotional manipulation. They'd apparently accepted that their former relationship with me was over, replaced by legal procedures they couldn't influence or avoid. Thursday morning, I dressed in my good suit, gathered my identification documents, and prepared to attend the closing that would officially end this chapter of my life. The legal system had worked exactly as Marcus promised. Property disputes were resolved through established procedures rather than family arguments. Justice was served through professional channels rather than emotional appeals. In 3 hours, I'd receive a check that represented vindication of every principle I'd tried to teach Bethany about financial responsibility, legal consequences, and the importance of treating family members with respect. Whether she'd learned those lessons remained to be seen. But the teaching phase was definitely over. The closing took place in a sterile conference room downtown, fluorescent lights humming over mahogany tables covered with documents requiring signatures. The title company attorney, a woman named Patricia, who looked like she'd processed thousands of these transactions, read through the final numbers with professional detachment. Net proceeds to plaintiff Vincent Brooks, $94,137.12. I signed where indicated, watched 42 years of property involvement reduced to electronic transfers and official stamps. The buyer, a real estate investment company, processed everything with the efficient indifference of people who saw houses as numbers on spreadsheets, rather than homes where families had lived and loved and ultimately failed. By noon, my phone buzzed with bank confirmation of the deposit. More money than I'd seen at once since my retirement distribution 3 years earlier. Jennifer shook my hand in the parking lot. Pleasure working with you, Vincent. I'm sorry it had to be under these circumstances. Marcus was more direct. Justice served. Your co-signer rights were violated, and the legal system provided appropriate remedy. Back at my apartment, I found a voicemail from Bethany, time-stamped from yesterday evening. Dad, we moved out yesterday morning. Theodore found a job in Jacksonville, sales position with a medical supply company. So we're starting over there, in a furnished apartment near the beach. I wanted to say, I understand now. About the money, about Theodore's gambling, about why you did what you did. I'm sorry it took losing our house for me to see it clearly. I hope someday you'll forgive us. I love you. I played the message twice, then deleted it. Understanding consequences was different from earning reconciliation. Apologies delivered after the damage was done carried less weight than responsible choices made when they mattered. Over the weekend, I toured condominiums in a golf course community about 15 miles from my old neighborhood. Most of our residents are retired engineers, teachers, middle management, the sales agent explained as we walked through a corner unit with windows overlooking the 18th green. People who saved consistently and planned for retirement. People who understand that financial security comes from systematic effort rather than get-rich-quick schemes. People who treated legal documents as binding rather than suggestions. People who honored their commitments instead of gambling them away. People who respected family relationships instead of taking advantage of them. I made an offer on the corner unit with the garden view and golf course access. Cash purchase, 30-day closing. No mortgage, no co-signers, no complications. Theodore and Bethany were starting over in Jacksonville with damaged credit, expensive lessons about disrespecting family members, and a marriage tested by financial catastrophe. They'd chosen threats and denial over responsibility, assuming family relationships exempted them from consequences. They'd learned otherwise. Thursday afternoon, I walked through my new condo one final time before moving day. Sunlight streamed through windows overlooking perfectly maintained fairways where other retirees pursued leisure activities they'd earned through decades of responsible choices. I'd join them soon, not as someone fleeing family obligations, but as someone who'd successfully defended his legal rights against people who'd mistaken kindness for weakness, family loyalty for unlimited tolerance. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and I had a new life to build, funded by principles consistently applied through proper legal channels. The foundation was solid. Construction could begin whenever I was ready. My phone sat silent on the kitchen counter of my new home, no longer buzzing with threats or desperate pleas. Theodore and Bethany were dealing with the consequences of their choices in Jacksonville, hopefully learning that actions have repercussions, that legal obligations matter, that family relationships require mutual respect to survive. As for me, I was learning that sometimes the best way to help people is to let them experience the full weight of their decisions. Sometimes justice served cold is more effective than love served warm. I opened a beer, sat on my new patio overlooking the golf course, and watched the sun set over Central Florida. Somewhere to the north, my daughter was probably wondering how things had gone so wrong so quickly. The answer was simple. They'd gone wrong the moment she chose Theodore's gambling addiction over her father's financial security. The moment they'd decided that legal documents were suggestions and family loyalty was a one-way street. Everything else had just been consequences playing out according to plan. 6 months after the closing, I received an unexpected letter. Not through my lawyer or the court system, but regular mail forwarded from my old address. Bethany's handwriting on a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper, and a money order for $500. Dad, Theodore and I are divorced. It became final last month. Turns out the gambling was worse than even you knew. He'd taken cash advances on credit cards I didn't know existed, borrowed money from people I'd rather not think about. I'm teaching 3rd grade at a school near the beach. Small salary, but it's honest work. I'm living in a studio apartment and driving a used Honda, but everything's in my name and paid for. I know $500 doesn't make up for what we did to you, but it's a start. I plan to send the same amount every month until I've paid back what Theodore stole from your investment in our house. I understand now that you weren't trying to hurt us. You were trying to save us from something that was going to destroy us anyway. I wish I'd listened. I miss you. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I hope someday we can talk again. Love, Bethany. P.S. I heard you bought a condo on a golf course. I hope you're happy there. I read the letter twice, then walked to my kitchen window overlooking the perfectly maintained fairway. A foursome was finishing up on the 18th green, their laughter carrying across the evening air. The money order sat on my counter like a question mark. $500 was a substantial amount for a 3rd grade teacher living in a studio apartment. It would take her 15 years to repay the $94,000 I'd received from the house sale. Money that represented not just my financial investment, but 36 years of sacrifice for her future. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that she was trying. Maybe the point was that she'd finally learned the difference between real consequences and empty threats, between legal obligations and family sentiment. I endorsed the money order, drove to my bank, deposited it into a savings account I opened specifically for Bethany's payments. Every month for the next 6 months, another $500 arrived. No letters, just money orders with her careful teacher's handwriting on the memo line. House payment number 2, house payment number 3, and so on. By Christmas, I had $3,500 in the account, enough for a substantial down payment on forgiveness if I chose to make that investment. I thought about calling her, thought about driving to Jacksonville, finding her school, having that conversation we'd been avoiding for over a year. Thought about explaining that justice served doesn't always preclude mercy offered, but some lessons take time to solidify, like concrete that needs to cure properly before it can bear weight. Some foundations need to settle before you can start building on top of them again. So I kept the money orders, added them to the growing account, and waited. Waited for the right time, the right circumstances, the right foundation for whatever we might build together in the future. After all, I'd spent my entire career learning that the best constructions start with solid foundations and proceed according to carefully planned timelines. This one would be no different. If you enjoyed this story about justice, family consequences, and the power of legal foundations, please hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you thought about Vincent's decision. Was he right to force the sale? Or did he go too far?